With the release of Shazam and Aquaman, it's time to stop and rank all of the DCEU villains from the worst to the best. Hi, my name is Sean, and I started this channel because I was driving everyone around me crazy talking about movies way too much. If you can relate, you're probably in the right place to consider clicking that subscribe button. With that in mind, go ahead and join me down below in the comment section. Share your ranking of the DCEU villains. Which ones do you love? Which ones do you hate? And which ones are an absolute abomination? As I go into this, there's no exact science as to which characters I did and did not include. So you might be wondering why I did include one person and didn't include another person. There's no particular strong, compelling reason. These are just the ones that felt right to me. With that said, before we get started, this video is brought to you by my supporters over on Patreon. I like to think of it as my inner circle. There's extra videos, weekly live streams, and a monthly watch party. If you think you might be interested, you can check it out down below at the link in the description. And let's get started. In last place is Steppenwolf and the Parademons. Steppenwolf is about as boring and generic of a space conqueror as you can get. He looks like a generic space conqueror. He says generic space conqueror type things. And his mission, like all space conquerors, is to collect some ancient relics so he can gain power and conquer people. There's no specific backstory that informs his actions in a meaningful way. In fact, the only memorable or distinct thing about him is the creepy number of times that he says mother. And that's definitely not a good thing. At number 12 is Enchantress and her brother. Now, I strongly debated putting her at the end of this list, but at least with her, there's a couple of things that are mildly interesting and memorable. They decided to give her human counterpart a romance with Rick Flag that grounded the character just a little bit, and there was this plot line about Amanda Waller having her heart inside of a box to control her, and that was unique. But once her and her brother are freed, the generic supervillain sliders are cranked up to 11. Evil Skybeam, check. Faceless army to provide cannon fodder for our heroes, check. Evil villain mumbo jumbo motivation, check. Unlike Steppenwolf, at least she tried to entertain us with a dance. Beyond that, she's just another total dud. Coming in at number 11 is Doomsday. Honestly, I don't have too many specific or big problems with Doomsday besides the fact that it's Doomsday. The idea of Luthor making a monster makes enough sense in the context, and it provides an opportunity for a big boss fight. I mean, there's no story, there's no motivation, but I guess he's fine as a big evil monster. Bringing us into the top 10 is Ares. In general, I think that Wonder Woman is one of the best films inside of the DCEU. But it starts to lose steam as soon as Ares shows up. For all the fun world building and adventures of the first two acts, it seems the cost of all of that was the villain. Because they decided to treat him as one of these twist reveal villains, we don't really feel his presence throughout the film, and when he does show up, it's underwhelming. Likewise, the movie gets really talky when he shows up, and when the action does kick in, it's the weakest action in the entire film. Now, he does provide a bit of a philosophical counterbalance to Wonder Woman, but it's too little, too late, and too Number 9, Lex Luthor. This one is actually painful for me because I think the broad usage of Lex Luthor inside of Batman v Superman is actually quite good. We get to see Batman and Lex Luthor's aggressive response to the appearance of the Man of Steel side by side, and that's very interesting to me. And then they cast Jesse Eisenberg and apparently told him to chug a bunch of Red Bull, suck on a bunch of helium balloons, all leading to one of the most distracting performances and characterizations of all time. Add to that one of the most complex and convoluted villain schemes ever put to film, and you take what was a great setup for a great villain and turn it into a massive disappointment. Coming in at number 8 is the Joker. To follow up Heath Ledger's iconic Joker, they decided to make some big, bold changes. First off, they made him a side villain. Second, they gave him a face tattoo. Third, they gave him a grill. Does all of this pay off? Not really. I mean, I don't hate this version of the character, Leto's performance, or the idea of sprinkling him throughout the film, but of all the things that you can do with the Joker, why this? It feels like they were doing weird things just because it had never been done before. Now, it is different, but it's not really good. At number 7, the 7 Deadly Sins. For the most part, they function basically as just the evil demons inside of the movie Shazam. I think that's okay. We do get a bit of a backstory about their connections to the wizards and the gods, and there's a nice little touch about how they're probably manipulating Dr. Sivana that's never paid off. So the most interesting thing about them, as well as him, doesn't go anywhere. So in the end, they're good enough evil monsters. Number 6, General Ludendorff and Dr. Poison. As previously mentioned, the strong aspects of Wonder Woman were the title character, the sidekicks, and the world building surrounding all of it. The third act and the villains, not quite up to standard. Now, before they kind of fizzled out in the third act, the idea of making human mad scientists the main villain was quite horrifying in its own way, and kind of was a nice payoff to Wonder Woman's philosophical arc in the film. There were and are people this evil in the world creating these horrific weapons, and so in the film, they kind of become the embodiment of man's inhumanity to man. Kicking off the top 5 is Dr. Sivana. Now, I actually really loved the backstory that they gave him during the first act of the film. There's something very human and emotional about a child who's been bullied by his brother and his father being told by a wizard that he will never be worthy. As fantastical as this situation is, almost all of us have had people speak words into our life that generated the best of us or caused lifelong insecurities. Unfortunately, once he obtains his powers, his character becomes very one note to me. As interesting as human as his character was in the first act, it's as bland and flat in the second two. It's a real disappointment because they put all the pieces in place to have a third act twist involving the 7 deadly sins who are manipulating him that went nowhere. So we almost had a great villain, but not quite. Coming in at number 4 is Black Manta. Given that he's a secondary villain who's defeated before the third act, his placement this high on the list might seem a little bit strange, but for me, the fact that they gave his character so much attention in backstory is why I thought he really does belong in the top of this list. The film Aquaman efficiently gives us his backstory, his placement inside of the plot, as well as his feud with Aquaman. It doesn't need to spell everything out, but we understand him as both a great warrior and a bit of an inventor. Now, it's unfortunate that they decided not to include him in the third act of the film, and hopefully we'll get to see more of him later on. Real quick, before I give you my top 3, remember to share your ranking down below in the comment section. Remember, my ranking's not the right ranking, it's just my ranking, and I want to hear yours down below. Also, after this video, check out this playlist up above with my other DCEU rankings, my rankings of the movies, my rankings of the heroes, all that fun stuff. You can check it out right up here. If you enjoyed this video, there's more up there that you will love. In third place is Amanda Waller. At first glance, it might seem odd to include her character on this list as she's kind of on the good side, but as soon as you step back and think about what she actually does, she's one of the most horrifying villains inside of the DCEU, especially because she believes in what she's doing. Thinking she's a force for good, she plants bombs in our protagonist's necks. She's responsible for thousands of people dying in the city, and she shoots her co-workers in the face in cold blood for knowing too much. She's an evil person with evil schemes, willing to kill people to accomplish her goals, and she thinks that she's morally justified in all of this. She might not have been in a good movie, but she's a very interesting villain. Our runner-up is Zod and the Kryptonians. Zack Snyder and David Goyer decided to amp up the Kryptonian mythology and build this whole backstory about family lore, destiny, and responsibility, and part of that was establishing Zod as someone designed as the ultimate protector of the Kryptonian line. Now, as dense as all of that may sound, as it plays out in the movie Man of Steel, it makes him a great foil to Superman, someone that is a Kryptonian, but who has lived his entire waking life on planet Earth. And thus, when Zod shows up trying to protect his people, Superman wants to protect both sides inside of the mix. Throw into the mix the fact that Zod might be the trained warrior, but he's not adapted to Earth's atmosphere, and Superman is adapted to the atmosphere, but he's not really a trained fighter, and you get two very powerful people with different strengths and weaknesses. Put all the pieces together and you've got a character with a whole backstory and mythology guiding his motivations with a nice set of skills that makes him a great threat to both our hero as well as planet Earth, and that makes for a great villain in my mind. But our winner in first place is Ocean Master. What makes him so fascinating is that while at times he does do villainous things, there's a lot of ways in which his worldview and perspective aren't wrong. From his perspective, Arthur Curry might be the firstborn, but he has a human father and he hasn't lived his whole life under the sea, so probably not a good person to be the king. From his perspective, the land people have been polluting the oceans for decades upon decades, and rightfully, he's kind of mad about that. Now, his response to these reasonable grievances is a bit tyrannical, but that's what makes him an interesting villain. There's multiple layers to his character. He's not always just mean and angry towards Arthur. He plays things differently at different points in time. He's certainly not a good guy, but he's also not just an evil psycho either. And for me, that's what makes him the most interesting and the best of the DCEU villains. Remember to check out that playlist right over there to see my ranking of the DCEU heroes and the DCEU films. Also, if you're interested in kind of going deeper with my channel, check out my Patreon page at the link down below in the description. Thank you so much for watching, and keep talking movies too much.